There are so many stories of pain and suffering and of brutality and horror and of survival and hope from October the 7th, 2023. For me, the images of murder and mutilation, of cold-hearted, even gleeful slaughter of innocents, the terror of the victims, well, I'll never be able to erase them from my mind. I've seen too much of this. So to think of the scars on those who have lived through it, the survivors, well, I can't conceive of the burden they carry. But the life-changing realisation for me is not so much the grotesque barbarity and the death cult mentality of this Islamist terrorism. I've got a good understanding of that dismal ideology through years in foreign affairs. I went to Bali after the bombings of 2002 and after the second Bali bombing in 2005. I headed to Jakarta after the Australian embassy bombing in 2004. I've been to Iraq, Afghanistan and Iran, to Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the Emirates, Kuwait and Israel, always speaking to experts, Muslim and non-Muslim, to get briefings about this scourge. Then I was one of the last to leave the Lint Cafe in Martin Place before that horror unfolded. So I know the threat that Islamist extremism poses. And I think way too many people in the West don't comprehend it. And I get that. It's not a mindset that we can identify with easily. We value life above all else. The Islamist extremist cult glorifies death and martyrdom. We've seen parents publicly celebrate the so-called martyrdom of their children as suicide bombers. Just contemplate that for a moment. But since October the 7th, I've been staggered by how many in the West, in politics, in public debate and in the media, have overlooked this reality and adopted an entirely political position, an anti-Israel position. And therefore they've almost excused the atrocities of October the 7th, or at least portrayed them as part of a political struggle for Palestinian statehood. They've missed the point, and they've twisted reality in order to suit their agenda. It's not as if we didn't know this would happen. In my first program after the October the 7th atrocities, just 2 days later, I said that you wait, soon Israel will get more criticism than Hamas. Because we'd seen this play out many times before. Terror and missile attacks against Israel go largely unreported, but as soon as Israel responds, there's news and condemnation. But the scale of this deception after October the 7th has been shocking. It's not just the hateful radical fringe, it's swept over the public broadcasters, the other left of centre media, and the left of centre of politics. This irrational and wrong-headed interpretation, pretending that Hamas wants a two-state solution, when their very charter and all their actions show that they want the elimination of Israel and the killing of Jews. Well, this has become so common, this misinterpretation, that our own government has joined others thinking they can appease extremists by taking the offensive and the absurd and counterproductive step of recognising a Palestinian state that does not exist, has never existed, and at the moment is incapable of existing. Anyway, as we ponder these things on this second anniversary, I often come back to one family's October the 7th story that haunts me, and it demonstrates beyond any doubt the evil, the bloodlust, and it shows that the atrocities of that day were not about resistance or statehood or politics. They were about hatred, the vile and fanatical hatred of Jews. And so it was that 32-year-old mother Cherie Bibas was kidnapped, then taken separately from her husband Yarden, but with her 4-year-old son Ariel and 9-month-old son Kafir. Look at her cling to her beautiful boys as they cling to her. And these animals not only abduct them from their home, but they film the ordeal to terrorise Israel, to boast to the world. We won't air their footage. A mother and her 2 young sons, such innocence and such promise, taken in a frenzy of hatred. And what did Hamas and their supporters do with them as hostages? They killed them with their bare hands in the days after October the 7th, and they mutilated their bodies. And then more than a year later, they traded their bodies, yes, traded their bodies for Israeli prisoners, staging a macabre handover ceremony. What a grotesque display of inhumanity. Think what it says about who Israel is up against. On this 2-year anniversary, war still rages because Hamas will not surrender. It started a war it knew it could never win. It was about sacrificing Palestinian lives to cause pain for Israel. Yet still Hamas prefers to extend the death and trauma for Palestinians in order to continue Israel's suffering and intensify Israel's diplomatic isolation. But let me then share one more story, one of suffering, courage and hope. This is what happened to a young girl and her little brother on a kibbutz in southern Israel on October the 7th, 2023. Daria Karp was 10 years old and her brother Lavi 7 on that morning. Alerted to an attack, which usually meant rocket or missile fire, the pair sheltered in their safe room with their father Davir and his partner Stav. Davir was texting the children's mother Riot, who was safe a long way away near Tel Aviv, letting her know that they'd heard gunfire on the kibbutz. Then they heard terrorists entering the house. Davir and Stav went out to protect the children. Davir with an axe, Stav with a knife, and they were both shot dead. The terrorists found the children huddled under blankets, but left them. A flash of humanity in the middle of this mayhem? One of them wrote on the wall that Al-Qassam don't kill children. Al-Qassam are the military wing of Hamas. And this time at least, they did not kill the children, although dozens of other Israeli kids were slaughtered that day. But the terror was not over for little Daria and Lavi, as their mother received these texts from Daria using her dad's phone to tell her about the murders. Reut got her daughter on the phone, conscious the terrorists were still in the kibbutz. Here's some of their exchange.
בטוחה שהוא מת?
כן, הוא שוכב על הרצפה.
הוא לא זז?
אני לא פוחדת.
הוא לידך? הוא לידך דריה?
אני לא יודעת.
לא לדבר.
For the next 3 hours, Reut was on the phone with her daughter while also alerting authorities for help.
יש פה מישהו, אני מפחדת.
דריה, הכל בסדר, אני פה.
לא הכל בסדר.
נכון, לא הכל בסדר, את צודקת. אבל אני פה. לא הכל
אני
בסדר.
מפחדת למות.
אני יודעת, מאמי. זה באמת מפחיד. זו סיטואציה מאוד 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 מפחידה. מאוד. אני פה. אני פה איתך, אני לא הולכת לשום מקום.
מתי יגיעי לאמא?
אני עוד פעם מתקשרת אליהם.
This brave little girl managed to get her brother, who was on the autism spectrum, to sleep. And later, 2.5 hours after her father was killed, she heard terrorists again in the house.
יש פה אנשים בתוך הבית.
טוב, לחזור למקום שלך.
אני כבר במקום, אני לא יצאתי.
אני פה.
אמא, אבל שיטפל בנו רק את.
כן, ממי.
אני לא רוצה עוד פעם לאבד מישהו, בכלל לא אותך.
לא תאבדי אותי, ממי.
איפה? צה"ל.
צה"ל יגיע.
עוד כמה זמן הם פה.
הנה, אני כל הזמן כותבים לי שבאים להוציא אתכם.
And listen to this poignant question, the question at the heart of this atrocity and its aftermath. And it's asked by a terrified girl in the middle of the attack.
למה את אבא ואת סתיו הם הרגו שהם ראו אותי לא הרגו?
בגלל שאת ילדה, ואת פעייה, ואת מתוקה, ואת לא עשית להם שום דבר, וגם אבא לא עשה שום דבר, אבל הוא...
כן, הוא קפץ עליהם בשביל שהם לא עשו לי כלום.
הוא הגן עלייך?
כן, גם סתיו.
Why do they kill? Daria and her brother were eventually rescued by a family friend 5 hours after their ordeal began. They weren't reunited with their mother till the following morning. One little bit of hope at a time of absolute horror. Daria has now taken to art as part of her recovery. It's a way to confront her fears and memories. Here are a couple of samples of her work. They're quite haunting, aren't they? She's endured what no child should ever go through. At least 38 children were murdered that day, and thousands of Palestinian children have been killed as unintended victims of the resultant war, a war Hamas deliberately triggered and has heartlessly refused to end. The only way to ensure that future generations of Israeli and Palestinian children do not go through this trauma is to eradicate the extremists, eradicate the terrorists and their Islamist extremist ideology. Because it is evil, and because it's not only a constant threat to Israel, but also a threat to the West, to our country here, and to mainstream Muslims right around the world. That's the lesson of October the 7th. But tragically, far too many people do the opposite, amplifying the propaganda of the extremists, justifying and encouraging the extremists. Will they never learn?